This is Elected, a podcast for women in and around politics, as well as our active accomplices. I'm your host, Sarah Elder Chaminara, and today my guest is Kathryn Marshall. Before we get started, in the spirit of reconciliation, it's important to me to share my personal commitment to learning the history of colonialism and the ongoing systemic violence and oppression against Indigenous peoples. The land where I live, work, and record from is the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, Tsuut'ina, Stoney Nakoda Nation, Métis Nation Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. So, Kathryn, I am so excited to have this conversation with you because I was thinking this morning on the way here, I was like, I would say you and Marie Heenan are kind of, I would say Canada's, equivalent of Gloria Allred in terms of the cases that you're taking on, the battles that you're involved in, and specifically what you're doing for women in Canada. So hopefully that's a compliment. I don't mean it to be anything else.
Marie Heenan's like my legal hero. I fangirl over her so hard.
Oh, really? I'd love to. I've never met her and I've never heard her speak, but that's definitely on my wish list of people to hear. So for people who don't know you, you're a partner at Levitt Sheikh in Toronto, I believe. Toronto. Yeah. Yes. And your legal practice focuses on employment law, human rights, and civil litigation.
That's correct.
And what brings us to have a conversation today is, in particular, is a discussion about sexual harassment in Canadian politics. And more specifically, you are the lawyer for Ariella Kimmel, who is currently suing the Premier's office. And please correct me if I get anything wrong or I'm leaving anything out that should be added, for wrongful dismissal and over her own harassment and for raising concerns about what she saw as a sexual harassment of another employee by a government staffer. And I think a lot of people listening to this will obviously be aware of this case. It's really important, I think, because too often these cases never make it this far and aren't made public. We don't know about them because a lot of it is dealt with internally, whereas Ariella had the courage to actually to take it in this direction. So what does this tell me more about the case and your role in it?
Yeah, so the case is fundamentally about the toxic, poisoned work environment that exists in politics. And specifically in this context, it's with respect to the Alberta Office of the Premier and the Alberta Legislature. But as we know, anyone who's been involved in politics knows that that type of toxicity exists in a lot of political offices. And people don't talk about it. This case, I think, is really important because it's shining a light on something that everybody knows exists, but people are scared to blow the whistle on because, of course, the big fear is you're going to be blacklisted. You'll never get a job in politics. You'll never get a job in government. You won't be able to lobby. And that fear is really accurate because it happens all the time. And when you mix power with influence, with secrecy, you get a lot of bad stuff. And Ariella's got a lot of courage to be on the pointy end of the spear, as I call it. And it's hard being the first. It's hard being that first person to come forward. But her case, I think, has already changed things for women in politics, and it will continue to do so.
I agree. And I can't remember off the top of my head, but have you worked in politics yourself?
I have. So I started working in politics when I was probably 16 years old. My mom was a municipal councillor, and I would always go to events with her. And then when I went to university, I got involved with campus politics, and politics has always been a love of mine. I've probably worked on like 35, 40 campaigns over the years. I met my husband through politics. I have been a staffer, but law is, my the reason I get up in the morning. It's like my big thing. And politics has kind of taken a back seat over the past few years, but I have like that very intimate knowledge of like what it's like to be in these offices. So, when I'm working on Ariella's case, like a lot of this is just so familiar. And I think anyone who's worked in politics has like these horror stories of what, they've seen happen to other people or what has happened to them. And it's making good people leave the system, which is a bad thing for our democracy.
I completely agree. The politics and government needs more good people, not less. And this definitely contributes to, as your point, you just said, good people leaving. So, and I believe you've also recently-ish sought a court order compelling Premier Jason Kenney to testify. The government has refused to release the report into the investigation. Has there been any movement on that?
We have a court date on August 9th to compel Premier Kenney to testify in this case. Litigating against the government is no joke. When you're fighting a case against the government, you're fighting against an entity that has like unlimited resources. And it can be really hard, but we're not giving up and we're going to keep plugging away. And yes, the government has refused to release the report of the sexual harassment investigation they conducted. So we will be seeking a court order for production of that report as well, because it's a really critical piece of evidence. But it's unfortunate that, we have to spend this time and money to do so. But you know what? Like Ariella is a fighter. And if this needs to go to trial, like we'll go to trial. But yes, we are looking forward to having that day in court. And Premier Kenney, he should be questioned in this case because he's got a lot of relevant information. And at the end of the day, ultimately the buck stops with him.
Yeah. And he's been asked about the case in the House going back to last year, and he said, I quote, "I was assured that action was being taken, and shortly thereafter that in brackets the senior staffers end quote contracted ended with the government." I mean, as if that just takes care of the situation. Obviously, that doesn't deal with any of the fallout or the actions. And since then, the government has come out with a summary report called HR Policy and Process Review. Premier's Office, Government of Alberta. It was put out on May 10th, 2022. So it says summary report. Does that mean that this potentially isn't a final, or what does that mean?
I mean, the fact that it's called summary, like definitely to me means that there's a much larger report that it's summarizing. So like, look, a lot of people ask me, because of the work I do, they're like, how do people, like, bad people keep getting jobs and like repeating, their predator like behavior over and over again? Like, how does that happen? And I know the exact reason it happens because I see it all the time. It happens because people like that do not receive any consequences. They get packaged out. They are allowed to resign voluntarily and they just go on their way. People sign NDAs, people sign confidentiality agreements, and rather than address the issues, it's just completely washed away. And fundamentally, when I read the summary report of the new HR policies, the big problem I noticed in it was that there's a really heavy emphasis on like this informal complaints process. And like, that is the essence of the problem. Like you actually have to have a real formal process where someone can make a complaint and there will actually be an investigation and there will be some consequences and there'll be corrective measures taken and things will change.
Yeah. So in the introduction to the report, so after the intro, it says current HR policy. So it says, and this is directly from the summary report, currently political staff with respectful workplace concerns can report them to the respective chiefs of staff or the HR director or other individuals responsible for HR, referred to as the HR director, in the rest of the summary report. The individual currently responsible for HR is also the Deputy Chief of Staff to the Premier and has direct access to both the Premier's Chief of Staff and the Premier. Review and assessment of reported concerns is performed by the HR director, who then determines whether informal or formal resolution is warranted. Where appropriate, the HR director may assist with informal resolution. If a formal investigation is deemed necessary, external investigation services may be engaged. And it goes on. So currently, the HR director, who is the Deputy Chief of Staff to the Premier, who I most broadly will say has no actual HR qualifications, because that is a political appointment and in a political role, not a true HR role, is the person in charge of directing this. And so these are political. So it happens in a political sphere. Mm-hmm. It is now dealt with by political people who have political agendas, who work for the most important politician in the province. And so everyone in this process is interested in not only in the protection of the reputation of the Premier, but also of the party that they work for, as well as the government. Because, other people, the word that comes to mind is honestly cover up. And I say that as someone who used to work in politics, because I know that's the way it works.
For sure.
You don't, my background, I worked for the BC Liberal government. The premiers I worked under were Campbell and Clark. And when I first joined government and in caucus, we were very explicitly told, don't do anything that you don't want to see on the front page of a newspaper.
Yeah. Yep.
And right. And that means not just like professionally, but personally, because, depending what it is, it'll be, like chief or, BC Liberal insider or UCP insider or NDP insider to government, involved with XYZ, whatever the incident is. So this process has to be, in my opinion, kicked out of the political arena and done independently. What do you think it should also be done independently, or is there still a role for these kinds of investigations to take place internal to the party and the government?
I think you raise a really good point that, like, fundamentally, the job of a political staffer is to protect the boss. Like, that's what we're all taught. We're all told, like, at all costs, you protect the boss. And it's very different in the private sector where, like, companies have policies, and if bad things happen, they investigate it, because they're not invested in like one or two people, right? The company has a whole like brand. They've got a whole
shareholders potentially.
They got a board of directors. They have a lot of people they're accountable for. But politics is totally different. Mm-hmm. It's all in many ways revolved around like one or two people, and they've got all their people in place. So I think in politics, having a process where like workplace misconduct is funneled through political channels, like you report it to your chief of staff, or like you report it to like, the quote unquote HR person who is not actually an HR person. That's a really big problem, because their primary goal is always going to be protect the boss. So what do you do if you've got a situation where you have like an elected person who's harassing someone, or you have a chief of staff who's engaging in workplace misconduct, and you have a staff person who has no protection, no power, no security, who is trying to report this? You're going to get a situation where that person is going to probably be retaliated against and is going to be covered up. And the policy, like the summary policy that was released in Alberta, one of the most concerning lines in it was, it said that there could be situations where someone might be moved to a different office, and that is not considered retaliation. I mean, in my view, there's just no situation where like someone should ever lose their job because they reported something. Like, that is retaliation. So like this notion that like, if you're someone who's experienced sexual harassment and you report it, and then you the consequences, you get shuffled away to like a different office. Like, how is that fair? How's that right? And also, like, how is there going to be any corrective action that flows from that? Like, there's going to be zero accountability.
Well, it also puts the consequences then fall on, the person making the allegations, likely the victim, and does nothing to deal with, and let's just be very clear, politics is very hierarchical. There is a very clear chain of command, and when you work in politics, you know who's at the top of the food chain and you know who's at the bottom.
Oh yeah.
And you know where your place is in that role. And you can also know politically who has, and it's 1000% not always based on merit. You know who is sometimes more important politically because of connections or ties or, different things. And they have inherently more quote unquote value than someone. And I say this, so I'm going to say, this is all very informed by my personal experience, obviously working in politics. I worked in an office where I would say that I was subjected to inappropriate workplace behavior, being told, my dress what I wore was inappropriate. I would get summoned into their office. I would often leave crying. And I made other people aware of it. I went to someone and it was, Sarah, like, this is the job. And, the person committing the behavior was my ministerial assistant, my chief of staff, the person who, most of the times in politics, that's the person you're supposed to go to report the behavior.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, at the end of the day, politics is a workplace. It's a work environment. Like, people who are elected, this is their place of work. Staffers, this is their place of work. Volunteers, that's their place of work. And everyone deserves a healthy and safe work environment where they feel valued and they feel respected. And it's a really, really bad thing for our democracy that politics has become so horrifically toxic. And I know so many amazing, smart, successful people that have left politics because they just can't handle how abusive it is. And actually, my husband told me this, and he's so right. Like, politics is kind of like it's kind of like a medieval court. Like, if you're in the king's favor, it's great. The second you're not, it's off with your head. And that's just how it is. And everyone knows that. And it's not just conservative politics. Like, as you pointed, it's every single party is like this. And I want to be clear that, like, I'm not saying that, politics should have like all of these rules and policies and procedures. Like, I'm not saying like, let's take the fun out of it. I'm saying, let's make it a place where people can be valued and respected. And politics is always going to be like about power broking and like who and I get that, but it is really, really wrong that we have situations in this country where like elected people have to resign because they're being abused. We have staffers who are being fired for blowing whistles. We have retaliation. We have all of it's rampant, and there are solutions that can be taken from the private sector. Like, if this was a private sector company, there would be an investigation like right away, and it would be addressed. And, because as you pointed out earlier, like, there's stakeholders, there's some mechanism of accountability.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, there should be accountability in politics because the stakeholders are the public.
Yeah.
It's not a publicly, in some ways, I mean, yes. The government does have stakeholders. And I do think that these cases are in the public interest because I think it speaks to the culture that this government, to whatever government it is, to what they're doing, how they're representing themselves, the kind of workplace that they create, is, also, the kind of province that we want to have and how we attract people. And it's just, it goes beyond that. And so much of the political process is I think there's so much, I mean, and I know some people will be like, why are you even talking about this? Because, you're focusing on the negative. You're highlighting the worst parts about politics, when we need more people, good people, to get into it. Well, we do want more good people to get into politics, and we want to make sure that the place that they are going to is a place that they will thrive and stay and be attracted to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, I sometimes have people come up to me and they're like, what are you doing? You're making politics look bad. You're like embarrassing the conservative movement. Not a lot of people, but a few people have come up to me like that. And I just say, look, let's elevate the standard. It's better for everyone if we address some of this stuff. Why do we want to have a system where smart, good, capable, professional people don't want to be part of it because it's a complete shit show? That is not good. I've been involved in candidate recruitment, for example, over the years for various parties. And I know that every party struggles to recruit good people. People don't want to run for office. Trying to recruit a woman these days to put herself out there, to put her name on a ballot, it is very, very difficult because people, they know the kind of abuse they're going to be subjected to and that the system's not going to protect them. So this is fundamentally just a very, very bad thing for our democracy. And, Ariella's case, I'm very proud of her. First of all, it takes so much guts to do what she's doing, so much. And people discount that, but to be that person out there, oh my God, that takes a lot. But I think it's going to change things. It's already started a really good conversation. And my phone's always ringing. People contact me all the time with their stories, and most people are too scared to kind of come forward, but to know that there's someone out there fighting to change things is very empowering to people and very comforting.
Yeah.
And again, it's not just staffers. A lot of elected people struggle with the abusive environment of politics.
Yeah, this isn't something that's isolated only to staff, but other politicians as well.
Definitely.
That's a very important point to make. And, actually, I do agree completely with you that Ariella is incredibly brave. Actually, I thought about it in the context yesterday. I'm not sure if you saw it, about Cassidy Hutchinson testifying yesterday at the January 6th committee. But, a really young woman in politics in a very incredibly powerful position, privy to, the most high level conversations and, events in American politics. And her testimony yesterday is shaking, the Republican Party and Donald Trump. And she's 25, I believe. For me, I see it as young women in politics are a force to be reckoned with, because there are things that we will not tolerate that past generations have, and that, and we're no longer tolerating the status quo.
Definitely. And you kind of look at look around sort of what's going on, south of the border, Roe versus Wade. there's a lot of regression that's happening, I think, for women's rights. And so we need women to be really front and center in politics. And we need that diversity of voices, especially on the conservative end of things, for sure. Where we've always struggled really to kind of get more women involved. And just so everybody knows, I've always been a Conservative Party of Canada member, card carrying member. But women are really needed right now, and their voices are really needed. And we have to create a more inclusive environment where they want to be part of the political systems.
Well, and I think so much of it too is wherever you sit on the political spectrum, I always see there's a definite cost to speaking out on issues that that are in opposition to parts of your party base, or maybe even the leader or the caucus. But in these kinds of issues, like on Roe, on abortion as healthcare, which it is, these, I think, go beyond, issues of like, oh, I can't say this because it'll make this part of the party, whatever party it may be, upset. It's because that silence is like it leads to, well, its own form of toxicity, but it also leads people who have opposing points of view to think that their position is actually stronger because you're silent.
Absolutely. And like, look, like I'm pro-choice, and it took me a long time to get the courage to like be really vocally pro-choice as a member of the Conservative Party. Like, I know that there's people in my party who like fundamentally disagree with me, but I realize like my voice on this issue is really important. So I'm always like one of the first people out there who's like, this is definitely 100% a medical issue. And this notion that like women are out there getting abortions as birth control, like, I mean, it's just absurd. But like Roe versus Wade, like the attack on that is very concerning. I mean, there's so many states that had like trigger clauses where they were going to immediately ban abortion as soon as Roe versus Wade was overturned. And if people think for a second that Canada is immune to that, they're very mistaken, because in Canada, we do not have the constitutional right to abortion. A lot of people think we do. It's a big misconception, but we actually don't. And the legality of abortion is not something that is like constitutionally protected. So, and there are like in the East Coast, for example, access to abortion is actually not very good. So like, this is something that I'm very concerned about. We need women to step up to the plate and really talk about these issues. And like, I know so many women who've had abortions, but there's so much fear about like coming forward and being like, I had an abortion and, I needed it and it was what was best for me, because there's fear that you're going to be attacked and called like a horrible monster, because again, like there's just so much poison toxicity out there. Right. And unfortunately, it's like something that if you're involved in politics, you're not protected against at all.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, especially in cases of, and we've seen full throated, because conservative politicians, Republicans in the US have, they've been asked, are there any situations in which, this, abortion would be acceptable to you, like in cases of rape or incest or ectopic pregnancies, which can kill a woman? And, the answer is no. To them, there's nothing. And so you actually had a column in the National Post, an op-ed, on May 11th. So prior to the decision coming out, it said overturning Roe versus Wade would be a huge setback for the women's rights movement. And like, I just want to say thank you for speaking out on that as a woman in conservative politics. That your voice is a really important part. Like, it's very necessary to the conversation and to the dialogue. Because this isn't an issue that should be, in my opinion, partisan. It's about healthcare, and it's about women's access to healthcare. It's about people's access to healthcare, non-binary trans rights, their access to healthcare. And they've already said, Supreme Justice Clarence Thomas has already, put on notice interracial marriage, access to contraception, like gay sex, like same-sex marriage, like all of these things. And so you're right. It is not, anyone who thinks that this can't happen here is living in a place of denial, and it's really real. That being said, I've also seen people in the last few days who have said like, no, we can't open this up again. Politically, don't advocate for this to be opened up. Because it just creates an opportunity for it to be rolled back, which I also don't necessarily, that's also, yeah. I don't agree with that.
I think that's a cop-out. Like, what was fundamentally really significant about Roe versus Wade is that it constitutionally protected the right to abortion. And just from a symbolic perspective, like that was so important. You had like the most powerful, freest country in the world that literally is standing for the principle that women have the right to an abortion. And now that is all gone. And I think the Canadian approach of let's not talk about it because it could just erode rights. Like, I don't agree with that at all. I think it's really problematic that we can't have a discussion about the importance of protecting women's safe access to abortion. And like, you know what? I feel like sharing right now. I'm going to share something. I've had an abortion. I have. And I have to tell the viewers, everyone listening, there's nothing actually for me that was scarier than being pregnant and not wanting to be pregnant. It was the worst experience of my life. It was a horrible decision to have to make, but it was what I needed to do to be healthy. And it's very scary. And I would not wish it on anyone. It's like the worst thing to go through. But thank God that I had access to a safe procedure. And because I don't know what I would have done if I didn't. And because I was in a horrible place in my life when that happened and I just couldn't do it. So like the idea that somehow in 2022, this is getting rolled back, it is terrifying. And that in Canada, we don't even have like a constitutional right or protection of abortion. I think everyone should be very concerned about that. And our politicians need to be talking about it. Like we need to have a debate about it.
I agree. Well, thank you. That's incredibly brave of you to share. We've never met in person. This is the first time we've ever met, but that's it's what you went through. I have a slight idea from my own personal experience of having had a miscarriage and requiring a D&C. But I can't imagine, that decision and how difficult it was to make. But it was your decision to make. Exactly. No one else's. It was yours. Exactly. It was your body and it's your choice and it's your access to healthcare.
Exactly. And to like have, like, I think we're very fortunate to be in a country where like there are doctors who will, without any judgment, perform these medical procedures. And they recognize and understand that this is a woman's choice. This is a medical decision. It's not anyone else's decision except for the woman. It's no one else's.
Well, and I saw two things that come to mind. First of all, I mean, you and I both had access to, a safe place to have the procedures done. But there are a lot of people. It's my understanding, actually, in Alberta, that you can only have it done in Calgary and Edmonton. So, for example, if you live in Fort McMurray, you would have to go to Edmonton, or if you live down south, you'd have to come to Calgary. Or there's not even I could be totally wrong, but there's also, Red Deer. It's always the 50-50 choice. Where do you go? Do you go north or do you go south? And you had mentioned out east on the East Coast. So like access is still very much an issue. And even just, asking a doctor for birth control can be problem. The doctor could say no, or tell me why. Or women asking for like tubal litigations. The doctor has, they could say, like, well, how does your husband feel about this? Or, what kind of questions and what are they asking and what kind of barriers are they putting into place? Not just access to the actual service, but how do you get to that point where you are in that position. But I think that for anyone who says, don't open this up, let's not, rock the boat. We're okay where we are right now. Like, I don't want this to be up for discussion. I do want it to be protected fully across the country. And if it's a matter of, of organization or of action or getting, being outreach and waging a campaign and lobbying and using every measure possible to make sure that happens, then let's do it. I'm not willing to risk potentially having this opened up in the House of Commons and actually have it go back the other way.
Exactly. And like one of like, I mean, when we talk about like access to abortion, like one of the problems in Canada is like there are a lot of communities and places where like actually abortion, although it's like totally legal, it's not actually easy to access. Like there aren't private clinics, like you have to get an appointment at a hospital. And like, you know, you kind of think of like someone who's in a situation where they're pregnant and they either don't want to be or they just can't be for whatever reason, whether it's socioeconomic or their mental
They're
health.
already vulnerable.
They're it's like the most vulnerable situation that you can be in, really, to have to like, you know, navigate this really bureaucratic system to try and just get your abortion organized. I mean, that's just it's really problematic. Like in the East Coast, like I think it's Nova Scotia, where they don't have private clinics. Like if you're going to get an abortion, you have to do it through the hospital, and like trying to get a date, you might have to wait weeks and weeks. So it's like I don't think that's acceptable either.
No.
So we need to have those discussions in this country.
Yeah, it is. And also, I mean, it's kind of a slippery slope, but I will say that also it is very triggering for me to see, well, actually, so yesterday I said, I'm not calling them pro-choice. I'm calling them anti-healthcare, because abortion is healthcare. So when I see anti-healthcare people with their ginormous signs standing off of Deerfoot Trail in Calgary, and as someone who has had something really difficult that was extremely traumatizing, you know, it's very upsetting to me. It's very upsetting to me. And so we're supposed to give, you know, these groups a very wide berth around what they can say and what they can show. And the fact that we need bubbles around abortion clinics. I remember when I walked into the Peter Lougheed Hospital to have my DNC, that there was, you know, a court injunction on the door telling people that this wasn't a place where they could protest. Like that, to me, just,
it's awful.
Yeah, it is awful. It makes an already very difficult thing, and already, you know, for whoever you are, whatever your circumstances, it adds to it. No woman should have to walk through, you know, a group of people with signs and you know, it's just it's too much.
Absolutely. And like you know, like the Morgan Toller Clinic in Toronto, like they can't have any signage. So you already feel like, okay, if you have to go to one of these clinics, like you're doing something really wrong, because you've got to go to this like nondescript like hole in the wall, right? But you know, it's done for the protection of the women. Mm-hmm. And like I'm so sorry you had to go what you went through. I think any pregnancy loss, whether it's spontaneous or it's you know, voluntary abortion, like it is a traumatic, horrible experience that you never recover from. And there's so much grief, there's so much anxiety. Like you know, when I went through my situation, like I cried and cried for weeks and weeks. It's the worst thing ever. And I don't know any woman who's been through that who's happy about it. I mean, it's an awful thing. And then you're hormonal and you're bleeding, and like let's just not even address the fact that like women's healthcare in general, like the way women are treated when they're going through pregnancy losses is like very disturbing. Like, why are we not given like proper pain medication? You know, we're just told to go home and bleed. I mean, there's so much to unpack there, but I get very angry too when I see people protesting like that. I want to say to them, have you ever been in a situation where you have a baby growing in your body that you either know you can't carry to term, or that if you do, you're going to die, or that you are not able to look after because of your finances or your mental health, or you're in an abusive relationship? If the answer to that question is no, then don't judge others. Like, what right do you have?
Yeah.
And wow, this is getting very.
I know this has gone in a direction that I didn't anticipate.
You know what? Things are super charged out there. I was in court on Friday when I got a text saying like Roe versus Wade has been overturned, and like I actually had to take a break. I had to like get up. I had to leave the room and like calm down for like 20 minutes because it was so triggering and upsetting.
Yeah. I think I'm still in an anxious state. I haven't come down from it since Friday.
Yeah. I know a
Like
lot of women feel that way. Like it's really hard to look at the news right now.
mhm. Well, and I also saw someone saying, like, oh, I'm a counselor and, this is, we're not meant to go through this. And it's like, yes, you're right. On top of a pandemic and, all of these other things that we're currently experiencing. And, Friday is Canada Day and, there are going to be more protests and, like, it's all too much. It's just too much.
It is. I think like we've all, the past 2 years have been so stressful, and to like have to now somehow process this. And like, I mean, I have a daughter, I have a 7-year-old daughter. Like, I look at her face and I say to myself, like, I have to do everything in my power to make the world the best place ever for her. And that's really what motivates me. Like when there's tough days, like Friday, or like, I have a tough day in court, or I have a tough day fighting the government. I'm just like, you know what? I'm doing it for her because that's my responsibility as her mother. And I'm able to fight. I've got I have the support network, I have the resources, I have the willpower and the education, and I'm never going to stop. And there's so much out there that's causing us to need to fight harder. We can't just look away as much as we all want to.
Yeah. We can look away, but we have to look back.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's so true. We have to look back.
Yeah. We can all look away. And then when we're, take a breath or take 10 breaths or, but like also this isn't something that a yoga class is going to fix, or, a bottle of red wine, or, a trip to the mall, or even one, if you have the privilege to access counseling, this isn't going to fix it. Like these are really significant issues that, at least in the US, we can protest and march all we want, but in the US, what's really going to potentially, the only thing that will overturn this again is, if and when the Supreme Court changes, which could be decades.
For sure. And like, God only knows what's going to happen in the interim.
Yeah.
There are so many states where, abortion is going to be rendered illegal, and like, and not just abortion, like, the Plan B pill and, the abortion pill and contraception. And like, yes, I know people say, well, you can easily drive to another state to get these things, but like, that is not acceptable at all. That is not an acceptable alternative. And there are there are many people who don't have those kinds of resources.
Yeah. Like, what if you don't have a car? What if you don't have a driver's license? What if you can't afford to take a day off work? What if you already have children? What if you, like, there are so many what ifs, and people say like, what if isn't a, like these are actual realities that people that are going to be dealing with. And they've already started. We're already seeing cases, personal accounts being shared. There was someone who shared that she worked in a hospital. A woman came in with an ectopic pregnancy and her doctor had to consult a lawyer. And it took,
God.
It took the what was shared. It said it took 9 hours for them to consult with lawyers. God. And then, but as well, that's just that individual lawyer. So what if there's an anesthesiologist? What if they want to consult a lawyer? What if it's nurses? What if there's so many things that, anyway, it's just.
And meanwhile, the woman's going through like the worst kind of mental trauma and emotional trauma of her life, and has to sit and go through that. I mean, that's just horrible. It's completely unacceptable, and it's horrific.
It is horrific, and it is unacceptable. Well, I know that we're out of time for today. I want to say a very heartfelt thank you for this conversation. We both shared things that, maybe we haven't shared before. This is the first time I've shared that particular story publicly, and it feels good. And I hope it's going to help some people. Yeah, I think it will. Your bravery, Ariella's, Like there are women are sharing things and experiences that I think we, that are really tough, difficult to talk about because of the emotions and, the things that they bring up. But, I don't think we share enough about these things because they maybe, are tougher to share, and people aren't as alone as they think they are.
Exactly. Absolutely. And that's what we have to share, because there's so many people who are going through things that to hear someone say out loud what they're going through. I know when I was in like the pits of my despair and going through my really hard times, like just I would like spend hours on the internet, like trying to find stories of like other women going through what I was going through, because there's so much comfort in that, knowing that you're not alone.
Yeah. So if you are listening to this and you are dealing with something related to pregnancy or pregnancy loss or abortion, you as I can only say, when you're in those moments, it does feel like you're the only person in them, which to some extent you are. But there are people, who you can reach out to, and I'd strongly suggest, if you have the access to do that. If you need those services, please find them. So Kathryn, thank you so much. I feel like, well, if and when you're in Calgary, I'd love to meet you. I feel like we could have a lot more conversations, and we can share a lot more too.
Definitely. And like over a bottle of wine.
Yes. Not at 10:30 or 12:30 in the morning. So thank you for today. Thank you for the work that you're doing. I will, and I think obviously many people will be following Ariella's case. I'm very interested, and this isn't something that I'm going to stop thinking about or talking about. So thank you for doing that work, and thank you for being an advocate. Thank you for being a conservative woman in Canadian politics. Sharing your truth, and please keep doing it.
Well, thank you for giving me the time today to do that, and for being so accepting and non-judgmental. And we need a lot more of that. This is wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.